Right now, if your head hurts, you reach for a pill. If you cut your finger, you reach for a bandage. You do this without thinking, because for your entire life, medicine has just been there. But strip that away. Go back before hospitals, before antibiotics, before anyone had ever heard the word germ. And you'll find something strange. People survived. Broken bones healed. Infections cleared. Babies were born and grew old. And the story of how they pulled that off is older than the wheel, older than farming, older than language as we know it. Let's start with the number that should stop you cold. 200,000 years. That's roughly how long anatomically modern humans have existed. For over 95% of that time, there were no doctors, no clinics, no antibiotics. And yet our ancestors didn't just survive individual injuries. They survived as a species, generation after generation, long enough to eventually build the world you're living in right now. Here's the puzzle. If you picture caveman medicine, you probably picture superstition, rubbing mud on a wound and hoping for the best. Chaos, guesswork, death by infected splinter. That's the assumption almost everyone carries. But the archaeological record tells a very different story. And that's where the twist starts to show up. In 1957 and 1960, in Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal man, roughly 40 to 45,000 years old, who came to be known as Shanidar I. His skeleton showed a withered right arm, likely amputated below the elbow, healed rib fractures, and evidence of a skull injury, all healed, all old, meaning he lived for years afterward. Anthropologist Eric Trenkhaus, who studied the remains extensively, argued this man could not have survived alone. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone changed his condition, kept him warm, kept infection at bay long enough for bone to knit back together. Sit with that for a second. This wasn't a man clawing to survive solo in the wild, like some prehistoric action movie. This was care. Community-based, repeated, deliberate care. Tens of thousands of years before the word nurse existed. Kind of ruins the whole grunting caveman stereotype, doesn't it? So here's beat one of the bigger question. If there was no medicine as we define it, what actually kept people alive? The answer isn't one trick. It's a layered system, and it starts with something you already have hardwired into you. Your immune system didn't appear with modern medicine. It's the product of hundreds of millions of years of evolution, refined specifically to fight the exact pathogens our ancestors were exposed to. Fevers, inflammation, white blood cells swarming a wound site. That machinery was running at full capacity in the Ice Age, no prescription required. Modern medicine didn't invent immune defense. It just learned to assist it, boost it, and occasionally override it when it wasn't enough on its own. But immunity alone doesn't explain healed compound fractures or deep wound recovery. That takes intervention. And this is where the evidence gets specific. At the site of Kebara Cave in Israel, excavations beginning in the 1980s uncovered Neanderthal remains alongside evidence that these groups used plant, matter and controlled fire in ways consistent, with wound treatment and food preparation, not random scavenging, but repeated patterned behavior. Fire meant cauterized bleeding, cooked food that was easier to digest during illness, and warmth that kept the body from losing the calories it desperately needed while healing. And plants weren't just food. Dental plaque analysis on Neanderthal teeth from El Sidrón Cave in Spain, studied by a team including biomolecular archaeologist Karen Hardy in the early 2010s, revealed traces of yarrow and chamomile, both bitter, non-nutritious plants with known medicinal properties, not culinary ones. Nobody eats chamomile because it tastes good. You eat it because you know, somehow, that it helps. That somehow is the real bombshell. Everyone assumes medical knowledge started with written science, with the Greeks, with Hippocrates, with lab coats and microscopes. But the evidence says the opposite. Medical knowledge is older than writing itself. It was observational, oral, and passed down for tens of thousands of years before anyone thought to write any of it down. Let that sink in for a second. Somewhere, a Neanderthal watched another Neanderthal eat a bitter plant after getting sick, watched them get better, and remembered. That's peer-reviewed science with a sample size of 1 and a memory instead of a journal. And it worked well enough to keep passing down. Let's zoom out on the timeline, because the scale here is wild. Roughly 200,000 years ago, immune systems and instinctive self-medication behaviors were already active in early humans and their relatives. By around 60,000 years ago, evidence like Shanidar 1 shows deliberate, sustained caregiving for severely injured individuals. By roughly 10,000 years ago, as farming began and population settled, medical knowledge started concentrating. Herbalism became more specialized. And eventually, plant knowledge, wound care, and setting broken bones became something closer to an actual practiced skill, passed to specific people in a group rather than everyone equally. That specialization is basically the first doctor, not a person with a diploma. A person the group trusted to know which plant did what, and who probably got really tired of being asked for advice at every single gathering. Honestly, some things never change. Now here's the contrarian twist stated plainly, because it deserves to stand on its own. Everyone assumes our ancestors survived despite having no medicine, but the evidence says the opposite. They survived because they built one of the earliest forms of medicine we know of, using observation, plants, fire, and each other, long before anyone called it medicine at all. Of course, this system had brutal limits. Life expectancy at birth for much of prehistory was low, not necessarily because adults dropped dead constantly, but largely due to high infant and childhood mortality, plus the ever-present risk of infection with no antibiotics to fall back on. If a wound went septic, there was often nothing anyone could do. That's the trade-off. Instinct and observation could get you remarkably far, but they had a ceiling. And that ceiling cost a lot of lives over a lot of centuries. Which raises the bigger question this whole video has been circling. If ancient humans already understood the basics of care, wound treatment, and self-medication, why did it take so long? Tens of thousands of years, to get from chewing yarrow in a cave to germ theory in a laboratory. Some researchers point to population density. Small, scattered groups simply didn't generate or transmit knowledge fast enough. Others point to the sheer difficulty of identifying invisible causes, like bacteria, with no tools to see them. Realistically, it was probably both, plus 1,000 smaller reasons lost to time. We may never fully know. And that gap, that frustratingly slow crawl from instinct to science, might be one of the most human stories there is. So let's bring it back to that timeline, because the numbers are the whole point. 200,000 years ago, immune systems and instinct were already carrying the load. 60,000 years ago, Shanidar 1 was living for years after devastating injuries, cared for by people who had no word for doctor. Around 10,000 years ago, that care started to specialize into something recognizably medical. And today, that same underlying instinct, to notice, to remember, to pass knowledge on, is why you know to rest when you're sick. Why your grandmother had a cure for everything, and why deep down, some part of you still reaches for tea and honey before you reach for the pharmacy. Everyone assumes cavemen survived, despite having nothing. But the evidence says the opposite. They survived because they built the very first version of what you now call medicine. One healed bone, and one bitter plant at a time. So next time your head hurts, and your hand drifts toward that pill bottle without a second thought, remember, that instinct to seek relief, to trust that something out there can help you heal, is genuinely one of the oldest habits our species has. If you want to dig deeper into the research behind this one, I've linked a few of the sources below. It's a rabbit hole worth falling into.